Hello, everyone. Good afternoon and good morning for those of you not on the East Coast. My name is Nick Anderson. I'm the project director for American Roundtable, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's event. Today is the second in a series of conversations that complement the 9 reports commissioned by the Architectural League's American Roundtable. The project seeks to bring together on-the-ground perspectives on the condition of American small to mid-sized communities and what they need to thrive going forward. The proposition at the heart of this initiative is that too often our understanding of rural areas and small cities is reduced to caricature and oversimplification. So our hope is to highlight in all their complexity and nuance communities often overlooked, and to provide platforms for individuals and organizations to share their stories and work, imagining, understanding, and improving their local built environments. The 9 reports of American Roundtable each look at a different community or region in the United States. The first 2 reports on West Virginia and Lower Rio Grande, New Mexico, have been digitally published, and the others are forthcoming this winter and spring, including one next Tuesday on Maine's River Valley. I don't want to take too much time away from today's presentations and discussion, so I encourage you to visit archleague.org to learn more about the entire initiative and to explore both reports. Our conversation today turns to the Lower Rio Grande region of New Mexico and the report, Diverse Peoples, Arid Landscapes, and the Built Environment. The report was conceived by editor Ane González Lara, and today we have the pleasure of hearing from her, along with many of her report's contributors, Sarai Argumedo, Lucia Veronica Carmona, Tina Cordova, Theodore Jojola, Kathleen Kambic, and Patricia Riggs. After we hear from Ane and her contributors, I'll be joined by the League's Executive Director, Rosalie Genevro. We will all discuss the report in more detail. We do hope to take some questions from the audience at that time, so please add any questions to the Zoom Q&A feature. And please do use the Q&A feature, not the chat feature if possible. And any questions we aren't able to get to, we will be sure to share with the presenters following the event. Ane González Lara, in addition to being the editor of this report, is an assistant professor at Pratt Institute School of Architecture and the co-founder of IDLE Projects. González Lara's research interests include pedagogy as well as social and climate justice as they relate to the built environment. González Lara taught at the University of New Mexico for 3 years and continues to split her time between Santa Fe and Brooklyn. Sarai Argumedo was born in South Los Angeles and raised in the borderland of El Paso, Texas, and Juarez, Mexico. She is a doctoral student at the University of Texas at El Paso, where she is exploring and implementing decolonizing participatory methodologies to help support Indigenous community development. And she also works as the program analyst for the Department of Tribal Empowerment at Isleta del Sur Pueblo. Lucia Veronica Carmona is a native of Juarez, Mexico, and has lived in Las Cruces, New Mexico for the last 15 years. After immigrating to the United States, she has led and participated in many different local campaigns and grassroots movements along the border region. Tina Cordova is the co-founder of the Tularosa Basin Downwinders Consortium. She is a 6th-generation native New Mexican, born and raised in the small town of Tularosa. Tularosa Basin Downwinders Consortium's mission is to bring attention to the negative health effects suffered by the victims of the first nuclear blast on Earth that took place at the Trinity site in south central New Mexico. Theodore Jojola is a distinguished professor and Regents Professor in the Regional Planning Program at the University of New Mexico. He is the founder and director of the Indigenous Design and Planning Institute, which works with tribal communities primarily in the Southwest, but has projects in other parts of the nation as well as internationally. He is also an enrolled member of the Pueblo of Isleta. Kathleen Kambic is an assistant professor in the Department of Landscape Architecture at the University of New Mexico and an affiliate with the school's Water Resources Program and the Department of Geography and Environmental Studies. Her research interests include water infrastructure, marginalized urban space, political ecology, and landscape theory. And Patricia Riggs is an Indigenous consultant and a citizen of Isleta del Sur Pueblo. And with that, I will turn things over to Ane.
Great. Thank you, Nick, for that intro. Before I start sharing screen, I would like to thank the Architecture League, Nick, Rosalie, and all your team for the incredible support that you've offered along the way and how open you've been to all the shapes and forms that this report has taken while working on it. So thank you very much for this opportunity. So I'm going to start sharing screen. Okay, so I hope that everybody can see my screen now. So as Nick mentioned, my name is Ane González Lara, and I'm the editor of the report titled Diverse Peoples, Arid Landscapes, and the Built Environment. The report focused in the Lower Rio Grande region, located in what's known today as southern New Mexico. The structure of this presentation will be, I will start just giving you a quick overview of how the report was conceived and its editorial standpoint, and then you will get to hear from some of the contributors that also participated in this project. When the League issued this call to work on this project, they were asking for editors to look at a place looking at it through these 5 different lenses. So public space, health, infrastructure, work and economy, and the environment. And what was clear to me when I started working on this project is that the project had to understand all these issues as completely interconnected and as one depending on the other. So you will see that as you hear the contributors and myself talk about the report. Also, when we focus a little bit more on the 7 contributions, you will see to the right, sorry, to the left, in darker red, highlighted the main focus of each of their contributions, and then in lighter red, the subtopics that each of them covered. But as I said, in one way or the other, the 5 topics, they all emerged while talking to all these contributors. Looking at the area, this gives you a quick idea of where the Lower Rio Grande is located in New Mexico. And then zooming in a little bit more, this map here shows the entire, or the 5 counties analyzed by the report, and also in darker red, the focus areas that the report looks into a little bit more specifically. So also to give everybody a sense of scale, the area covered in the report is roughly 24,000 square miles, and it's home to approximately 336,000 people. So the report itself is divided in 7 contributions that you can see listed here. And also to give everybody an overview of the main focus or the main editorial standpoint of it, the report focuses mainly in 2 things. The people in the arid landscapes of New Mexico, as they have an impact in the built environment. The original peoples of this land are the Navajo, the Pueblo, and the Apache. And this land has suffered waves of colonization, starting with the Spanish conquistadores, and it went from being claimed as Spanish territory, then Mexican territory, and finally US territory. And it is important to point this out as the report challenges some of these notions of boundaries and territorial confinements, and you will get to hear about that from some of the contributors. The other aspect, the arid landscapes, differed vastly from the ones that we saw on Wednesday in Nina's beautiful presentation on West Virginia, where we saw all these lush landscapes. In New Mexico, red and yellow are colors that are even more prominent than green in the landscapes. And therefore, water is the main element that becomes very important when talking about New Mexican landscapes. So thinking about that, Kathy, and you will hear from her, explain her contribution more deeply. But she talks about who has access to water, boundaries around water, and all this system that is also developed around the use of water in the region. And finally, another thing that the report does is that it focuses quite a lot in the past. In order to understand New Mexico, one has to understand its past and how the people inhabited in this land. And I feel that this is also a common thread between some of the contributions. And in New Mexico, the past is present, and that shapes the future of the area. So looking a little bit more closely at each of the 7 reports, the first one is a song, and it's a song composed for this report, and it deals on water and the environment. So the title is Water is Life, Oliver's Song, and it's a song composed by Oliver and Yari and Laila Jun. Laila Jun is an indigenous activist from New Mexico, and Oliver Anjari is a Mescalero Apache elder. And here I want to play just a little bit of the song. I hope that you can hear it.
He said it's not a song, it's a way of life. It's a forever thing, it's a message.
If you want to hear the entire song, you can find it in the Architectural Lakes website. The second contribution is by Kathleen Kambic, and we have Kathy with us today, so she will be able to tell you a little bit more about her work and her project on this project. So Kathy, over to you.
Thank you, Ane. Thank you everyone for being here today. Thank you, Ane, especially Nick, the Architecturally Grant Foundation and NEA for their support of this project. So the work that I did as a part of this report was called Water Scarcity Elephant Butte Reservoir, and it focuses on specifically the area of the Rio Grande that goes between Elephant Butte Reservoir and the state line. I think one of the most important things to understand, kind of riffing on what Ane has already said, that water is so primary to community, to politics, to culture, everything that happens in New Mexico. So the way that I approached this report was to try to look at it scalarly and think about how all of the water is interconnected. The Rio Grande is, like all Western American rivers, is heavily dammed and reservoired and controlled in many, many ways. But it's also integrally connected to the Colorado River. And as we know, the Colorado is kind of the most well-known river, but I feel like in the Rio Grande is actually the canary in the coal mine, I think, for climate change and for the economic and social impacts of those changes in water volumes that are available to people to use for different things. You can see in this diagram the watershed of the Rio Grande, beginning in Colorado and ending at the Gulf of Mexico. And on the left, the black bars represent the total capacity of the reservoirs that are related to Elephant Butte Reservoir or are part of the larger system. You can see that the maroon and the light red show 2013 capacity and 2020 capacities of these reservoirs. So there are serious volume issues occurring throughout the watershed to deliver water to people for many reasons. We receive 100,000 acre feet a year from the San Juan Chama project, which brings water from the Colorado River watershed into the Rio Grande watershed for people to drink in Santa Fe and Albuquerque. Half of that is returned by our water treatment plant south of Albuquerque. And it's a major part of what makes a contribution to Elephant Butte. The water then again, leaving Elephant Butte, which is controlled by the irrigation district that runs between Elephant Butte and Las Cruces, makes for, I'm sorry, what was I gonna say? Elephant Butte Irrigation District actually controls how that water is distributed. So they're both kind of a governmental agency, but they're also an economic agency. And as I noted in the introduction to the report, you'll see that they already came out in October of this year saying there's not going to be enough water to allot to the farmers, which actually brings us to the second issue. So Ane, could you forward the slide for a moment? This is a little bit drier diagram, but I think it's really important to explain one of the major problems with water in the Rio Grande Valley. So when there isn't enough water running through the river and running through the ditches that provide water to the laterals and allow the water to be spread out amongst the farms, people resort to wells. And so they pull water from aquifers, the groundwater below the ground, in order to feed those fields. And what happens is that the water water table actually gets separated from the river. So the river begins to contribute to the water table rather than be a meter of how much water is available in the ground. And so it's kind of a downward spiral. It's a snowball rolling downhill of consumption that can't replace what's there. And so once that well drawdown occurs, the Rio Grande suffers even more. And so it's kind of a no-win situation unless we were to get many pretty epic years of rainfall in order to recharge all of these systems. And this is part of one of the major, and I think I only have 1 minute left, but the major lawsuits between Colorado, New Mexico, and Texas. We have a compact, the Rio Grande Compact of 1938, and without the regulation of water between Elephant Butte Reservoir and the state line being completely spelled out in that compact, the way that those farmers use that water can actually diminish what Texas receives. And so it becomes kind of a feedback cycle where New Mexico and Colorado are being sued by Texas for not delivering enough water. So it's an extremely complicated situation. And I know in this few moments, it seems like I'm really jumping around. But the thing is that all of these things are so integrally tied together is that it's kind of like a ball of yarn. So specifically the quality of the soil, the quality of the environment, the humidity, the climate shifts that are occurring start to play out legally and economically almost immediately. And then just to look at the final slide. This is a farm, part of Joe Lujan Farms, down towards Las Cruces, and this is a fallow field right now. And Joe Lujan Farms is one of the larger farms that's available, and even they are fallowing fields because there isn't enough water available to grow chili and their other crops in all of their land. And I think one of the things that this increase in climate variability, the availability of water volumes necessary to produce crops is going to continue to do is to put pressure on those smaller farmers who maybe can't afford to dig and operate wells versus larger farmers that can afford such things. It's going to reduce the variety of the communities. It's going to put pressure on people to sell their land. It's going to create sort of seismic shifts amongst these historic communities that have really made place here for hundreds of years. So yeah, I think that the Rio Grande is so necessary for people to understand in terms of how water can completely construct and deconstruct all of the most important things to us as humans living in communities together. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Kathy. Now we're going to listen to Tina Cordova. In the report, there's an interview, a conversation I had with Tina Cordova over the summer where she talks about her work with the Tula Rosa Basin and Winders Consortium. So Tina, it would be great if you could share with everybody the work that you do with them and how you got to be where you are right now.
I just want to say good morning, good afternoon from beautiful Albuquerque, New Mexico. As I watched the full moon rise the last couple of days over the Sandia Mountains, it reminded me that I am so blessed to live in a state that is so beautiful, but a state that has been so negatively affected by things from the outside that have changed our lives forever. I want to thank Ane González Lara for considering me to participate in this project and considering the idea that, you know, people's environments are sometimes invaded in ways that they shouldn't be, and that it has huge negative effects. I want to also thank the Architectural League New York for this opportunity. It's an honor actually to represent all the people, the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people who were affected by the nuclear test that took place at Trinity. My goal is to actually share with you a little bit of information about the test itself that made it so impactfully negative to human health. And then my hope is that I can just briefly touch upon what it is that the TBDC does to bring attention to the negative health effects and to work constantly to be included in the 31-year-old fund that was established in 1990 to take care of people downwind of the Nevada test site. So first, let me tell you, the Trinity test was the first test obviously ever conducted any place in the world. And it was very unique unto itself because it was the first test and because there was so little known about exactly how to go about doing these tests. The test was conducted on a platform 100 feet off the ground. That was never repeated by the US government, because they learned from placing it on a platform 100 feet off the ground that it produced massive fallout. And in reality, in taking the bomb to Japan, where they wanted to actually produce massive destruction, they detonated those bombs at heights of 1,600 feet and 1,800 feet respectively, so that they produced destruction and not fallout. So what happened with the Trinity bomb is that the bomb intercepted the Earth, then took up an enormous amount of sand, dirt, animal and plant life, incinerated it because it created more heat and more light than the sun, and then took it over 7 miles past the atmosphere into the stratosphere. Of course, everything that goes up has to come down, and for days afterwards, per the oral histories that we've collected, and also per some of the firsthand accounts given by the scientists who worked on the project, an ash fell and coated everything, the Earth and every living being, animal and humans. The other thing to know about the Trinity test is that they used weapons grade plutonium. 13 pounds actually were packed into the bomb, but only 3 pounds were necessary for the fission process. So an entire 10 pounds of plutonium with a half-life of 24,000 years was dispersed in that fireball and the ash that fell from the sky to the Earth. To understand also why it had such huge human health impact, we have to also reflect on the lifestyles of people in 1945 in rural New Mexico. The ash became part of their water supply because they relied on cisterns for the collection of water for drinking and cooking, bathing, cleaning, and every other purpose. And there were no grocery stores because there was no refrigeration. You could buy at a mercantile store, for example, sugar, water, flour, coffee, rice, cereal, but you couldn't buy anything that was refrigerated. So you bought no meat, no dairy, no produce. All of those things were produced by yourselves at home. And now all of that was enormously affected in a negative way. And so the people received maximum exposure from the radiation that fell from the sky. We had people living as close as 12 miles to the test site. And there were communities, at 20 miles, 25 miles, 30 miles, 35 miles, 40 miles. I lived in a community or grew up in a community that was essentially 45 miles from the test site. And I'm a downwinder, I'm a cancer survivor. I had thyroid cancer at 39, and the first thing they asked me was, when were you exposed to radiation? Unfortunately, I lost my father to cancer. He developed 2 cancers, my father Anastasio Cordova. He developed 2 cancers that he didn't have risk factors for, and a third cancer in between the two. The 2 cancers just deprived him of any kind of decent life at the end, and our family has suffered greatly. I have an aunt that is waiting results of a biopsy today. My dad's older brother died of an autoimmune disease this summer. And I'm the 5th generation in my family to have cancer since 1945. We have not been spared this horrible tragedy. There is no family in those communities surrounding Trinity that's been spared. And it's a huge social injustice because our government has never looked back. They've never come back to do anything to assist us. In 1990, a fund was established called the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act that actually affords reparations to the people downwind of the Nevada test site. And something to know is that New Mexico was also downwind of the Nevada test site through the summer of 1962, well documented. And the compensation ends at the New Mexico-Arizona border, as if as if there's a lead curtain there that somehow offers the people of New Mexico protection. So what can people do to assist us? You can go to our website, www.trinitydownwinders.com, and you can learn everything you could ever want to know about our work. Eventually this year, there will be bills entered into this Congress to amend the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act to include the people of New Mexico. And I just ask that everybody get on board in supporting that idea. And you can do that by reaching out to your members of Congress. Again, I want to thank Ane for this opportunity, and I look forward to answering any questions that anybody might have. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that, Tina. Now we're going to hear from Lucia. The report also has an excerpt of the conversation I had with Lucia over the summer, and Lucia will be telling us a little bit more about her understanding of place within the borderland and also the work that she's been doing more recently with younger generations. So Lucia, over to you.
There it is. Can you? Hi, good morning. Is there? Can you see?
Yes. We can hear you.
Yes. You're sharing your screen right now? Okay. Good morning. Walitlanesi, Guiraba, buenos dias. It's an honor to be here sharing space with you all, with our audience. With all my respect, I always follow this path of empathy lab. I was searching all my life. Then I started to wait for it, for something to find out the truth or the answers. Then I realized that the truth and the answers are in itself, in myself, in my heart, in my inner person, and that is part of the sharings that I brought to the table or to the discussion always. Thank you, Anne, for this opportunity, and the whole team, the whole project. This is a nice vision. I will say a nice vision because alongside with the presenting realities that harm our communities most of the time, there's a beautiful ways to say as well, and keep the hope for everybody that another world is possible. And as we're walking and learning from each other and learning from looking at our past, like you mentioned at the beginning, we are rebuilding ourselves and healing and accomplishing new dreams in a way that our ancestors already line out as a path to follow, but we were blind. We were keeping out of those duties because of our reality in history, the colonization and the assimilation in many ways, right? Coming from the border region, ni de aquí ni de allá, that's how we feel living in the border regions. I've learned from one of our teachers in NMSU, Dr. I remember his name. He was so, it was a Spanglish class, and it was so interesting the way how I was learning how in all the borders in the world, there's always a submission from one country under the other one or to the other one. And the pueblo that is on the other side has to give up their language, their culture, and their identity and self-esteem as well. So that is how I grew up in the border, rejecting English, rejecting everything what signifies United States. And I was wondering where are my roots working, where I come from. And even my grandparents that coming from the Sierra Raramuri, the Tarahumara, they were ashamed of being that because it was a way of surviving in the border. But still, I was trying to find out that part. So during my searching time that I was looking for an understanding, it took me to a long path, a long journey and learning from other rural communities in Mexico, that the Spanish wasn't even wasn't even my language. And I'm sorry, somebody was calling here. And but then still trying to find out those answers, coming back after 20 years of journey, and my elders that I met there in the southern part was just telling me, just go where you started and you will be able to see. And then the spiral came back again and started now in the other side as an immigrant, and I was rejecting that concept as immigrant. And I'm always say, I'm a natural people of this land, as you mentioned as well at the beginning. We are all natural people in our land. And when we talk about belongingness and identity, we always go again to the land. And knowing that we don't belong, not even to one side or the other, because that is the reality, then we want to accept that we're fronterizos. So I am a fronteriza from the borderland. And that brings me a broad opportunity and diversity to engage with different people, regardless their color, their beliefs, their thoughts, but only based on the human being. What values do we embrace together, and what price are we willing to pay in order to bring justice, in order to bring that togetherness, to rebuild ourselves in this life, in time for our new generations that are coming, our grandkids. So I'm grateful, and I would like to share during the questions and answers, more, have the opportunity to expand, definitely, and learn from all of you. Thank you. Klasu Kamati.
Thank you, Lucia. Just to mention super quickly that in the interview, you also described the work that you're doing right now with the school that you are working on in Las Cruces. Maybe you can just say very quickly something about that.
Yes, that was a natural part of this long process, from one opportunity in exchanging with the community. There was like, how do we heal our intergenerational trauma or historical trauma, knowing where we come from and learning from other projects that we're doing almost similar aspects in bringing language and culture and recovering that narrative as indigenous people of this land as well, and claim that narrative, reclaim the narrative of who we are, in order to be clear where we go. So the Raíces del Saber Chinashli Community School is an elementary school that with along with other partners and friends, my partner Carlos Aceves, bring together, and it's an organic project that right now we're in the starting close to the third year of operations. Took us a lot of time to get there. It's a matter of I don't know if it's patient, but also the be open to this hope, and it takes the community in itself, at large, to bring this kind of projects that is not only to serve, it's not a matter to serve a little group of people like the students that are in the school, but creating a model that could be replicable and impact at large, and contribute a little bit with our little contribution in the landscape of our region and the education system as well. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lucia. That was really beautiful. And now we also have with us Saray Argumedo, Theodore Jojola, and Patricia Riggs, and they will be sharing with us some of the work that they've been doing at the Isleta del Sur community. So over to you, Ted, Saray, and Pat.
Good morning. I was asked to start this presentation, and just real quick, I just want to thank the Pratt Institute for considering Indigenous people, and also congratulate Sarai on her work, and Ted as well for always being there to guide the Pueblo. We are from 3 different communities, but we're coming together to help each other. So just briefly, a background on the tribe. The Pueblo has a long-standing experience of displacement, We were displaced after the 1680 Pueblo Revolt, and we reestablished ourselves where we are now, but only to be dispossessed of our land again and our natural resources, water systems, and farms. So this colonization oppression has rendered, very many challenges for the tribe and our cultural, ceremonial doings, as well as our self-governance. But it's not a sad story in the end, because 50 years after being recognized by the United States and having a Restoration Act passed, we went from 5% of our tribal members or 50% of our tribal members having only a 5th grade education to unprecedented college graduates, as well as we're reclaiming our land back. So what we're doing right now is we're having a resurgence of land use planning, and that's aiding the tribe to visualize a healthier and more cultural sense of place. So this program analysis is a tool that aids to open dialogue among our youth. The tool supports rebuilding from our cultural foundation and to conduct planning for the next generation by guiding community to gather from within our own cultural knowledge and our own institutions and traditions. So what I really like about this tool and what Sarai is doing at the Pueblo is it's opening discussion for our youth to talk about what was entrusted to us by our ancestors, and it's guiding emerging leaders at the Isla del Pueblo. So these empowering methodologies are helping us to sustain our future and guiding the Tigwa, actually to guide other Tigwa to heal while we reclaim our space. So as we follow through our path, as Tigwas believe that we follow this path or camino through birth and into life and death, and that is a sacred trust that was entrusted to us by our ancestors. So this tool is helping us to adapt, to sustain ourselves, and to persevere. So for that, I'd like to congratulate Sarai.
Thank you, Pat. Que no se milwitiwak nanotoka Sarai Argumedo. Thank you, Ane, for this this beautiful opportunity and for seeing value in this work. I truly appreciate that. And Pat and Jojola, thank you so much for guiding me and helping me this way. So ideally, the Pueblo analysis derives from the very uncomfortable feeling of having to use colonized methodologies in indigenous spaces and in communities of color. So ideally, it does the same as the SWOT analysis, which is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. The Pueblo analysis in return opens up dialogue. It connects more with the community. We get to kind of share and be able to exchange, I remember the first time that I ever had to use a SWOT analysis being a planner. It was super uncomfortable, especially using it in these spaces where, it was people like me, how was I going to come in, coming from the same place? How was I going to come into communities and use these colonized tools that were super uncomfortable, even for me to use? So I took it upon myself to kind of take the component of it, but create something for my people. And before Pueblo analysis, it was actually Barrio analysis, which I had the privilege of using in Chiapas, Mexico. And I absolutely loved it. I had the privilege of coming to work with Isleta del Sur Pueblo, and was able to create this, which has been awesome. And big shout out to my models who are community members and you all can see in these graphics. But ideally is kind of reclaiming that, just what Pat said, is reclaiming that space and reclaiming those tools and that knowledge that we already have. And I'll allow Jojola to wrap it up. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Sarai and Pat, for those comments. The only thing I just want to iterate is that this is really part of tool sets that we've been developing as part of the Indigenous Design and Planning Institute here at the University of New Mexico. We had the opportunity to work with Pat Riggs when she was Director of Community Development about 4 or 5 years ago as part of a studio that we did within our planning program, where they had basically asked us to look at developing a cultural corridor plan. And it was driven by the fact that they felt that people from the outside really weren't respecting their sense of place. So from that, we were able to develop a series of models to kind of think about how it is that we could put those values and their identity in the forefront. And from that, then kind of emerge some new tool sets that essentially are trying to redefine how it is that we build that relationship with communities that aren't necessarily having been respected in the past in terms of the kind of Euro-Western imposition in terms of values that were being brought that were not really consistent with their own community. So Pat has been instrumental in making sure that, we apply these tools in a way that really help to empower the community to deal with that. And Sarai has been the champion in actually beginning to implement and change these and adapt them in a way that really becomes relevant and resonates within this kind of community context. So just in summary, I think, what this really shows is the importance of how it is that we attend to our community in a respectful way and essentially acknowledge the fact that the people there are already beautiful already. So that's our kind of overarching accomplishment in trying to relate this effort. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was really beautiful. And finally, I want to describe really quickly other 2 contributions that are also featured in the report. This one is another conversation I had with Miguel Calatayud. Miguel Calatayud is the CEO of Qualitas Health. Qualitas Health is currently growing algae in New Mexico. I don't know if you can see my cursors, but they are in close proximity to the U.S. and Mexico border. This here is the U.S. and Mexico border. And one of the things that they are saying is that they found in New Mexico their perfect ecosystem to grow algae. They are growing algae in non-arable land. They are using brackish water in their production, and they are actually able to repurpose 98% of that water, only losing 2% due to evaporation. Also looking at productivity, to put this into scale, the productivity of algae compared to peas in terms of how many amino acids are produced per acre, algae produces 300 times more than what pea crops do. So so I guess that this contribution here is also looking a little bit more at what the future or what a possible future for agriculture might start to look like in the region. And then finally, the last piece is a video or a visual essay, and it's basically a set of videos that John Acosta took of the main regions or the main areas that the report focuses on. And I believe that John might be in the audience with us. So you can see some of the videos in the website. And of course, this is the main protagonist of the project, the Lower Rio Grande. So with that, before I wrap up, I want to welcome everybody to visit the website and to read the entire report. This is just a quick snapshot of the work that we did as part of this project. And finally, I also want to thank everybody and all the contributors that have participated in this work. It's been an incredible opportunity to work with all of you. You've been incredibly generous with me, with your time and with your knowledge. So I very much appreciate it. And also just a quick note, my email is included in this slide, just in case anybody in the audience wants to continue this conversation after this event is done. So I think that with that, we can conclude the first or our presentation, and maybe we can move to the Q&A.
Thank you all. That was really fantastic, both as an introduction, but as a lot of really beautiful thoughts and provocations. I think for our discussion, Rosalie is going to kick things off.
Hi, everybody. As your report makes very clear, and as your comments today make very clear, one of the essential characteristics of this place is the coexistence of multiple cultures. What do you, and this is to all of you, to any of you, what do you hope for the future of this region, and in terms of further embracing and strengthening that coexistence? And what kind of lessons do you think that this region has for the country at large as we move towards a broader multicultural future?
Maybe before we think that I'm sure that all the contributors want to say a lot about this, but I feel that it's very beautiful the way that, as I said in the beginning, that borders and territorial confinement is understood in New Mexico, that I feel is very different than what one might think when looking at it, maybe just from a floor plan where you see really clear lines dividing spaces and communities. And I feel that it's a way more complex layering of cultures and understanding. And I feel that that's something that hopefully also the report starts to touch upon, that it's way more complex than that what maps and other types of representation might start to point to. And as I said, I think that in maybe New Mexico, the past or the future is based on building upon the past as well. And I feel that whenever successful ways of thinking of the future have been done in New Mexico, it has always been when the past has been combined with the present to look at the future.
If I can interject, yeah, if I can interject, I think that really, you know, the case studies, the presentations really very much are also talking about emerging voices. I think too often we've seen a lot of these things profiled, you know, for the benefit of whatever it is that had been staged. And of course, they're going to kind of hone it in a way that validates their kind of intervention. But what gets unstated in this are just those impacts on the ground of the people who got affected in the long term. And I think, you know, too often what happens with our approach to community development is that we simply parachute in and then we leave, and then we expect somehow that things have been changed in a very direct manner, when in fact the people are just sort of left with the residual of the kind of things that in many cases have unsettled them more than it's actually helped them out. So I was particularly taken, I know, you know, by the kinds of situations around culture, identity, language, health. All of these are really important components because we're talking about place-based communities. And the fact of the matter is, both in the short term and the long term, we're not going to leave. We're just simply not going to leave. And the situation with regards to that is then, you know, we have to deal and cope with emergencies that we're still trying to deal with after all of these generations.
Ane, if I might, I think it's important, you've mentioned about how we have to reflect on the past to understand our future. New Mexico was long ago declared a sacrifice zone. We have here existing this cradle to grave idea of nuclear development, testing, et cetera. And it's affected the native people here. The people most affected in New Mexico have been indigenous people and people of color by the nuclear industrial complex. And when I say cradle to grave, what I mean by that is that we invade native lands like the Navajo Reservation, the Laguna Pueblo. We built these open pit uranium mines. We extracted the uranium from the earth, and then we develop and test these devices here with no regard for how it has affected people. And now we're under consideration, the state of New Mexico, for a high-level storage facility, and they're going to bring plutonium pits, spent rods from nuclear power plants all across the country on rail cars here, and we don't even benefit from the electricity. And so native people, the Mexicanos that immigrated north from Mexico, we're the people that have been most affected. We have to recognize that New Mexico is the only minority majority state in the union. And so there's been environmental racism that's influenced outcomes for people here. And to look towards our future, we always have to recognize that, you know, that is a part of the US history. And I agree with Ted, a lot of things take place that people don't recognize will have influence over people. And I've been told many times, why didn't you all just move away once you realized what had happened to your environment? But we're rooted in this place. And minority people, people like us, people of color, are very much rooted in our place. It's not easy to say, okay, I'm just going to uproot and move from this place. And so I do think that in looking towards the future, we have to recognize that these social injustices have existed for at least 75 years in New Mexico, actually longer than 75 years, since the time that they took the land from the people of northern New Mexico to establish Los Alamos Labs and the Manhattan Project. I just wanted to say that that has been a huge part of our history here.
Kathy, it looks like you, yeah.
Sorry, I'll make mine quick. I really want to agree with the comments that have been made so far. And for me, it really comes down to two terms that really help me frame these concepts. One is intersectionality, that we really have to think broadly about the different combinations of factors that make people feel a certain way about a place, but also this idea of the role of expertise. You know, is it the federal government that truly has expertise? And I think Tina makes the case and Ted makes the case that that's not necessarily true. That when we can't parachute into sites, that we need to have a deeper, richer understanding of all scales of expertise, including literally historically being in place over time, is a set of expertise that can't be replaced. It can't be faked.
Nick, do you want to?
Sure. So, yeah, and I think one thing that is kind of clear with these challenges, and something I wanted to ask you all about, is that they're all sort of long duration and cumulative impact challenges. And as you well know, not being necessarily acute problems, often having the kind of political attention brought to it, or this sort of sustained societal work that needs to happen is just often not, is much harder when in issues like this. So whether it be climate change and kind of increasing arid lands, you know, centuries worth of cultural marginalization and violence, or cumulative radiation poisoning over decades from an event that happened long ago. So I wanted to ask, all as you know, activists in one way or another, what are the strategies you use to focus attention on these types and to build societal and political momentum to actually tackle some of these challenges? And kind of going to the question that Kathy, you brought up in terms of expertise, how within all of our respective professions, you know, might we better turn our work to these issues that might not have the immediacy, even if still the same urgency that you are all engaging?
Tina, I was going to suggest that maybe I feel that you have a lot to say about that.
Well, first of all, let me say that the government has controlled the messaging around what happened in New Mexico since the time that it happened. I mean, we have to reflect upon the fact that they didn't notify anybody before or after doing the test. And they had a total disregard for human health, to the extent that they actually let people freely go out to the Trinity site for many, many years. And they took children out there on field trips. And there's, in the written history, there's comments like, we'll prepare to evacuate people, but we're not going to evacuate Indians, you know, or what are we going to do with this land now? Well, we'll just give it back to the Indians. And so the government has controlled the messaging and said throughout time, throughout history, that the area was remote and uninhabited. But we know from census data that there were tens of thousands of people living in a 50-mile radius. In doing this test there the way that they did, and they fully knew and were warned ahead of time that there would be massive fallout, they relegated us to nothingness. We were American tax-paying citizens. The horrible history of this is that a lot of women were at home that day alone with their children because the men were serving in the Pacific, and they relegated us to nothingness. The reality is that after the Trinity test, they went in search of a location where they could detonate bombs with a 150-mile radius uninhabited, and that's how they came across Nevada. If you draw a boundary around Trinity 150 miles, it encompasses Albuquerque to the north, El Paso and parts of Mexico to the south. It encompasses Silver City to the west and past Artesia to the east. It's our entire state, and parts of Texas and Mexico. So, you know, the government is very good at suppressing stories that they don't want to recognize or acknowledge. And this is a moral and an ethical issue. We have to stand up. We have to correct the history. We have to make sure that the people's story is told. I always say we've heard enough about people like Robert Oppenheimer and like General Groves. We now need to hear names like, you know, like Gonzalez, like Marujo, like Sanchez, like Cordova, so that the history of this is corrected. And part of that is our job, obviously, to continue to tell these stories in a truthful way, acknowledging the people who were enlisted into service without consent or knowledge.
Pat, did you want to say something on this?
Yes, I just wanted to add that to your question about the cumulative impact, and that some of our strategies is basically taking like studies that are being conducted right now, especially like from this panel, but educating our community on the environmental and water impacts that are happening and that continue to happen. I think that it's important to note that the trauma is still taking place to the land in our communities, which eventually just translates to trauma for our ability to be able to continue as Pueblo people and to be able to sustain our culture. For example, the river, the water no longer flows into the Pueblo. So that is how we conduct our ceremonies. So we actually have to buy water from the irrigation district to be able to let the water flow for our ceremonies. The other thing is that it's amazing how things are still impacting us. And if you look at the Trinity project, that's where our ancestors are from our Pueblo. We are from the Salinas Pueblos, which is right there. So those things continue to traumatize our community. That's where we still go back there to pray for our ancestors. And so there was damage done to our ancestors and our ancestral graves. So I think it's important to never forget what happened in the past, but also what could happen in the future. And so a strategy for us is to continue to educate community.
So I'm going to jump in with a question that I think takes off right from that. With the Biden administration, I think we all expect a very different approach to a number of issues. with particular relevance to the Lower Rio Grande Valley, including the treatment of the border, the administration of federal lands, the rights of indigenous people, and an interior secretary from New Mexico. What kind of changes in these areas do you hope for, and do you all think will have the greatest impact on the region? Anybody want to start?
Well, I think it's really important for us as communities to sort of really translate the comprehensive planning process in a way that is informed by what it is that we see as being important in terms of continuing our identity. I was just an expert witness just before this panel with the New Mexico State Legislative Education Committee, and a bill is being forwarded that's being part of what's called the Yazzie remedy, where the state of New Mexico was basically determined by the New Mexico Supreme Court as being not responsible to its mandate to serve minority populations, specifically Native students and Hispano students. And I think in that whole process, it really comes out that many of our communities themselves don't have a real clear grasp of what it is that we need in terms of the way that some of these kinds of solutions are coming into our community. And we've been too dependent for a long time with outside experts coming in and basically telling us and giving us those solutions, which are actually very much value driven in terms of Euro-Western norms. So I think in many cases, what it does is it simply adds kind of chaos to our communities, because there's really in many of our places an incoherence. That's what that's the only way you can characterize it in terms of the landscape, in terms of the built environment, because of all the kind of disruptions, the stop and the starts of all these types of things. So I think it really behooves us, in order to be able to develop these kinds of comprehensive planning initiatives from the locality, in order to try and make sense out of this before we inform exactly how it is that we're going to tackle some of these kinds of challenges.
Sarai, did you want to add to that?
Yes, and thank you. I guess in a way, it makes me wonder, like, I think that our people have waited too long, regardless of who is in office. We've still done the work. You see a lot of grassroots movements that have been going on for a very long time, and these men keep on coming in and out of that White House, and we're still doing the work. I think that we're going to still do it, regardless of who is there, who approves and who doesn't. We have to continue that momentum as a people, because that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to stop us. They're trying to impose fear on our people. But it's obvious that no matter who has been in administration, who has had these titles from a local or a national level, we've continued to do this work. And I think that we need to keep that mindset. We need to keep pushing regardless of who's there.
Tina, I see your hand is raised as well.
Yes, and I just, I can only give a perspective based on the advocacy work that I do. And the specific question was relative to the new administration and the fact that for the first time ever, we're going to have a woman, Native American woman, serving as the Secretary of the Interior. The amazing thing is that Representative Holland is from Laguna Pueblo, where they had the largest open pit uranium mine established in the United States. And she understands our issues in particular very well. And she will take her perspective to that position. And I think it will be actually very productive for the people of New Mexico and for the people that are doing the work that I do. The other thing I have to say, that it's refreshing to see a new administration rolling back some of the very dangerous things that were under consideration just a few months ago by the past administration, which, for example, was the idea of testing nuclear weapons again, because it'll always be a marginalized community that's most affected by that process. And so the fact that, you know, President Biden has decided to rejoin the test ban treaty is a huge step forward, and a huge step forward for marginalized communities, because again, it's those communities that are always most affected by these processes. And so I'm happy, I'm very happy, I'm hopeful, and I think that we stand to make great progress with this new administration and with Secretary Holland at the Department of Interior.
There was a question someone raised earlier, and that I think kind of comes to the heart of a lot of this, is that we're talking about this, or the artificiality around certain borders, you know, and that there needs to be a lot of interaction with Mexico as well. That may not always happen to solve all of these issues. And I was wondering, and maybe Kathy, if you can start on this, how you know, issues such as around water management, but around the border and immigration and everything else, what you're seeing in terms of engagement with Mexico and sort of transnational discussion, and you know, given the need for all of this sort of advocacy and work and the sort of Byzantine structures and overlapping jurisdictions that exist, you know, where do you even start? I mean, you described it as a ball of yarn, which seems really appropriate. You know, how does a person on the ground, how does a citizen of any of these places actually penetrate these huge overlapping, you know, bureaucracies?
Wow, thanks for the softball question here. You know, it's incredibly complex. I think that the most vulnerable populations are very much the immigrants that are working seasonally on farms in the southern portion of the state. You know, people without access to services, who don't have a say in communities yet, who may not even have appropriate places to live at the moment. They're extremely vulnerable populations. And I think that one of the things, again, getting back to this idea of expertise or even autonomy, is to bring, is to not sort of drop in, like Ted was saying, like a parachuter, like an NGO, but to actually come in and offer community services that can support people to then put out more, you know, to be more articulate about their needs and sort of build literally from the ground up, or from the center of the communities out. Because I think, you know, the federal government, the state government, local governments, they especially local governments, I think, are really strapped for resources, especially now in the pandemic. There's not the same tax bases coming in. Like Tina mentioned, we don't necessarily get the tax base from all of the things that New Mexico carries. And so I think that sort of community outreach is really important. And then also thinking about how there could be some more economic equity in terms of you support for the small farmer. You know, large farmers get tons of help from the federal government. And I think that if that support was more equitably distributed to people who really, really need it, small farmers who are working to, you know, save certain seed populations and diversify crops and maybe farm organically, I think those are incredibly valuable to us on a, you know, in a worldwide environmental scale at the end of the day. So I don't have like one good answer. I think that there's many answers, but I think that the smaller the political unit, getting down to the community, the family, the farmer, the better luck we might have in the long run.
I want to, just before we end, because I want to tuck in a question about the design professions, that maybe back to you, Kathy. landscape architecture, what do you think, what's the role, the most productive role a landscape architect can play in a setting like the Lower Rio Grande?
I think one of the best roles would be as an advocate, but also as a coordinator. I think that the skill set that landscape architects develop as a part of the discipline speaks to working with the very technological, but also working with the environmental and working with the community. At the end of the day, landscape architecture is about bringing people together in public space. And if we can't learn to balance those many things, then I don't think we can be as successful as we want to be. And so I think it's about balance, about bringing together that expertise that I was talking about, and giving voice and coordinating responses to these wicked problems, these incredibly complex things that we're facing, that allow for I guess just a broad range of those needs to be served, a lot of voices to be brought together. I think that that's truly the power of landscape architecture.
And Ane, to you for the actual last word as an architect, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I think that maybe similarly to what Kathy is saying, I think that in a way it's looking at things that might not be physical, and looking at things that you don't see at the first time that might strengthen our profession, no? And thinking that it's not just the things that you see, but as we saw from all these stories, it's also how the human-made built environment has an impact then that expands beyond the life of the building or even multiple generations. So I think that it goes through being aware of all these issues. And I also feel that something that landscape architecture does a lot, that as architects is something that we sometimes forget to do, is to look also to the sky and to the ground, no? And thinking that it's not just what lies above the surface, but what's below the surface and also beyond the building itself. So I think that if maybe it's just expanding our understanding of how a building is conceived by a community, and also always understanding the community in which you are having an impact, and seeing what are the things that you know and what are the things that you don't know, and trusting the community in their knowledge and working with them with that. So those would be my 2 cents.
Okay, thank you. And thank you all so much. I mean, the report and today's program, I think both have fulfilled more than we could have hoped for. Our goal with American Roundtable, which is to open up a conversation and open up channels of understanding to between people and between different practices in different places in the country. And this has been fantastic. Thank you.